You're listening to Frontier Matters, the podcast from 1914 Reader. Join us as we dive into bold conversations on growth and change in the frontier economies of the world.
Our guest today is someone who has spent much of his career asking a simple question. Why do some societies become prosperous while others, despite vast sums of aid, expertise, and good intentions, remain poor? His journey has taken him from Nigeria to the United States, from engineering to business, and ultimately into a deep intellectual partnership with Clayton Christensen, one that produced The Prosperity Paradox, a book about why good intentions so often fail and why real prosperity tends to emerge when entrepreneurs create new markets for people who have long been left out. His work combines moral seriousness with practical discipline and asks how poverty actually ends. Today, we'll talk about what he has learned since writing The Prosperity Paradox and what he thinks we still misunderstand about jobs and development. Efosa Ojomo, welcome to Frontier Matters.
Thank you. Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Toby. I am a fan of your work and I enjoy following you guys. So thank you for the invitation. I'm honored.
Great. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Okay. All right. So let me start off. In the Prosperity Paradox, you try to shift the development question, right, from how do we fix poverty to how do we create prosperity, through market creating innovations that serve non-consumers, generate jobs, build tax bases, and pull in institutions and infrastructure. If you are taking a red pen to the Prosperity Paradox today, 6 years after the publication, what is the passage that you most want to revise, qualify, or add maybe some nuance to? And conversely, what part of the book do you think has become more clearly true since you wrote it?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, a red pen. There was something Clay taught me, that there's no good writing, only rewriting. So if I took a red pen, there's a lot that would have changed. But I've learned a lot through talking to entrepreneurs on the ground, talking to government people. Quite frankly, learned quite a bit reading from you guys' work as well. And I think one of the biggest areas that I would revisit or provide some nuance to is the interplay between entrepreneurship and governance, or governments, or existing institutions, and how entrepreneurs have to think about the state of governance where they're going to do entrepreneurship. I'll give you just a couple of examples, insights, things that weren't in the book. One of them is, I've been sort of fascinated by government and how much resources they have to spend in a country. And if you look at our budgets that we fight over in Nigeria, anywhere from $100 to $200 per person per year is what the government spends, right? Now, if you're going to go do business in that country and you're going to invest a lot, then you really have to ask yourself, what can I expect this government to do? Not what should this government do? What does this government sign up to do? What is the oath they took? But what can I expect realistically? And then how can I design a business model that works in that kind of environment? We didn't interrogate that as much in the book. It's certainly one that we are, I'm working on another book, and it's one that I'm thinking a lot about. And I don't know yet if there'll be a chapter on market creation and governance, but that's certainly the path that is leading. So that's a really big one. Another one is, there's a professor out of UCL, University College London, did some research on the transition from military to democratic sort of governance. And he found that when that transition happens, a country loses about 20% of their GDP for 25 years, the 25 years after the transition, because essentially what you're doing as a country is you are learning to build the democratic institutions, and that has a negative impact on growth. But then after the 25 years, you've sort of built the muscle on average, right? We can argue where Nigeria is, but you've built the muscle, and then the growth starts to take off. Again, if you're an entrepreneur, you're just thinking product market fit. Let me see, how can I sell? But man, you have to be thinking about that if you're operating in that kind of environment, right? And so I think one of the things, just to land the plane, that we could have done better was really slow down and say, okay, if you're going to work in an environment where the government is heavily under-resourced, you're providing products and services or infrastructure the government typically would, man, how should you really think about that and design a model that helps you operate in that kind of environment? I would say that's probably one of the biggest ones. Yeah.
So, I mean, to follow up slightly on that, the World Bank now says global poverty reduction has slowed to a near standstill. And with nearly 700 million people in extreme poverty, poverty rates in low income countries higher than before the pandemic, and around 3.5 billion people still living below the $6.85 per day line. Now, your book had the timing of coming out just before a lot of, what we are reading about or constantly thinking about in the news today, like COVID, the COVID inflation, conflict, and the fragility of the general geopolitical environment. Does that make you think the world has simply not produced enough market-creating innovation? Or does it make you think the book underweighted macro shocks, state capacity, geopolitics, debt, conflict, and all these things?
Yeah. So Toby, I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the things I like to do in life and in teaching is design solutions for problems that are within your control, right? And so essentially what that means is global shocks will always happen. There was nothing I could do to stop Donald Trump from starting the war with Iran. There was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
So there's nothing I could do wherever COVID came from, whether it came from the lab or that market. I mean, there's nothing I could do, right? In fact, I was just reading a piece in FT just now saying that a bunch of people selling roses and tea in Kenya, their business is decimated because a lot of their markets are in the Middle East and so on, right? So on some level, right, the world will happen. And it's really hard for me to think about a framework that protects against that besides insurance, right? So you go and get political insurance and so on. It's really difficult. And so I tend to write less about that because I actually am not sure how to protect against things like that besides the conventional products out there. And so what I'm trying to do is focus on long term, even if these shocks happen, if your country continues to slowly climb the development ladder, over time, you'll be able to manage the shocks. So COVID, Biden, Trump, then Biden, they sent us money. I was sitting in my house. They sent me $600 or so, right? There were programs for different businesses who lost sales but kept employees, and they got refund checks from the government, right? So these shocks will happen, but as the countries move up the ladder, they'll be able to manage them better. And so from an entrepreneur standpoint, it's really difficult for me to, if I were going to write another book, I'm like, I think I don't know how to prevent against that, right? If you know what I mean. On the macro angle, which I think is a bit more manageable, even though they are intertwined, right? Because COVID, inflation, and so on, and then with the war in Iran now, they're intertwined. But it's also mismanagement of monetary policy and so on. On that angle, the best advice that I have is quite simple. If you're going to invest in a country, then I think it's important to interrogate what has happened in that country over the past decade or two. And if you've not noticed anything fundamental changing, then I think it's important to expect the same thing to happen going forward. And so if the currency has been devalued time and again, if inflation has been double digits, if purchasing power has been reducing, then it's not by force. If you're going to go there into that environment, then I do think it's important for you to say, okay, let me see how do I manage this. And so I think that's the approach I take. I wish I had a better answer. I wish I had a more,
No,
but I'm like,
it's a practical. I mean,
Mm.
it's a good enough one. It's a practical answer. Yeah, yeah. There is that's a variant of I think it's what they call the Lindy effect, right? So if something has been happening all the time, you can expect that. There've been devaluations. There'll probably be more devaluations going forward. Yeah.
Man, Nigeria just can't catch a break. Okay, go on, please.
Well, yeah, no, I think so now, but then I also do think, and this is kind of where I now start to one of the biggest things I've learned, right, from reading your work, right, is and I'm not going to mention names, but I'm going to just describe a phenomenon. When we think a lot about um, rent-seeking behavior, a lot of times we don't pair that up with massive investments in a country. And so if someone comes and invests a lot of money in a country, there is sort of the automatic belief that that person is doing something amazing for the country because they are investing there. They can invest in London, they can invest elsewhere. But that's one side of the equation. If I came to Nigeria now and someone said I should invest all my life savings, but they'll give me $1 billion, I mean, of course, that's easy for me. And I can say I've invested everything in this country. I had options and so on. And so I think that's important for us to start to think about and interrogate is, yes, there's the money coming in from investors, but what is the economy getting as a result? And then what is the average person getting as a result? And it's not complicated. I think a simple way to measure this is what is the cost per this product over time? Now, when you create a market, you really create a market. You go back to the telco, right? Very expensive 25 years ago. If you wanted a phone, very expensive, SIM card, 20K, 40K. Today, a SIM card is free and it's less expensive, right? When you truly create a market that invites investors, that really serves the non-consumer, you will see pricing going down over time. Yes, the iPhone is now $1,000, but what you get in the iPhone is different from what you got 2007, 2008. You look at cars. Okay, you can say pricing is going up, adjusted for inflation and so on. But what you get in a car is different, right? And so when you look at the cost to a customer in a country over time, in a market that you say people are investing in, if it's not going down, then we really have to ask, what are we doing? Right. And I think that's one thing that our analysis needs to be a bit more sophisticated than individuals are investing in the country, so therefore it must be a good thing. Not everything that is not bad is good, so.
That's a very important point.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think one of the book Prosperity Paradox, one of the more provocative claims that is that markets can pull infrastructure, institutions, and even better governance into place, right? So the Christensen Institute's current framing, it still argues that corruption is often a solution people hire when legitimate ways of making progress are unavailable, and that societies reduce corruption because they develop, not the other way around, right? Used to believe that the sequencing is mostly right, that institutions, infrastructure, and governance are pulled into being by new markets, or have the last few years kind of like persuaded you that uh, there's kind of like a minimum floor of public goods that has to be pushed into place before any kind of market creating innovation can really take off.
Yeah. So I would say I still stand by the general thesis, right? Um, and it's really hard to think about this from the standpoint of a country. I have to think about it from the standpoint of sectors. And so if you ask the question, is there a minimum floor? Absolutely. There's a minimum floor, I think, depending on the sector you're going into. This is why I think it's important to slow down and think, okay, what's the sector I want to go into? And is the sector giving me enough? Do I have enough power? Do I have enough control? Do I have enough relationships to actually do business in a way I want to do it? Right. But it's hard for me to think about that from the standpoint of a country because what is the minimum floor in any country, and what does that really mean, right? So I would think about it from a sector standpoint. That's the first thing, and maybe this is a function of going to business school and not the school of government, right? Because every this occurred to me, maybe it was sometime last year, that nobody really lives in, and be patient with me, let me land. Nobody really lives in Africa, right? Well, like, what is Africa? People live in a very specific place, a very specific time, and they experience very specific things, right? And they are subject to very specific struggles, very specific needs, and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about Africa en masse, and then to a lesser extent, Nigeria or Ghana or Ethiopia or so on, and say, this can't work in this country. Well, we kind of have to be more specific than that. And so I think that's kind of where I would take that is, there are enough reasons for different countries in Africa not to work, not to develop. You can point to enough, whether it's level of corruption, whether it's institutions, infrastructure, and so on. There are enough things you can point to. But that doesn't mean there are no specific sectors that can't get a foothold, right? And I think I want the conversations to be more specific so that we can now discuss specific problems and specific solutions, as opposed to maybe more generic, right? Nigeria, Ghana, the government, the this. It's we kind of have to be more specific. Now, regarding markets and institutions and infrastructure, I think I'm really trying to take a pragmatic approach, right? In the book we talked about Ben Flyberg's research, where he talks about most infrastructure projects are late, under deliver on economic projections, and so on, right? Like, we talked about that. And I've followed his work since then. And it's just really difficult for me to see how you build an entire set of infrastructure when you don't have the talent, you don't have the capital, you have to go and borrow. Um, and then the markets are really thin. And then, it's hard for me to see how that happens, right? But on a macro level, if I look at, you had him on your show, his Charlie Robertson. So he takes sort of this macro view on fertility, education, um, um, and energy, right? And he says that for him is sort of a floor. Some countries can now take off, and so on. Um, yeah, so I think I tend to go like more bottoms up, right? I tend to interrogate specific opportunities, and then what is this opportunity gonna demand of me? What is it gonna demand of my company, my businesses? That's the approach I take, and if there are enough folks who can go that route, then I think change does start to happen. It's just the problem is finding the enough folks. I think that's, so I still stand by it. I think the markets do pull in, right? I think the other way around, the fact that the markets pull in does not mean work isn't being done, doesn't mean um, that you are not intentional about it. Let me be very clear. I often tell my students, and whenever I'm advising entrepreneurs, I'm like, it's your job right now to understand what the government's gonna do or not do to your business. That's your job. Um, and so it's and then there's also an aspect of I don't know, what can I realistically expect from the government? Yeah, I was having dinner. I will land the plane here with an ex-governor last week, and it wasn't. It was like somebody just invited me. It was like six of us or so. So I've never met him. I don't know him. I don't have contacts like that. So it's not like I'm. And I asked him. I said, "What's your view? What's you were there. You were there. What's the relationship, government, the people?" And he said, "Efosa, it's like spaghetti." And I think what he was trying to say was, you imagine a bowl of spaghetti. It's so muddled, so complex, complicated that, and then you see, I really don't know what to do with that, from my standpoint. Now, if you asked me that question, I'd say a governor or a president, I would probably give you a different answer because, again, I have more power and control. But the answer would necessitate the creation of new markets and making sure the incentive systems are at play so that the markets stay. Lose the markets, you lose the economy. You go to Detroit. Detroit once had a bustling market. You go to Erie, Pennsylvania. You go to Rochester, New York, where Kodak was, and so on. And these cities had bustling markets, they had jobs, tax base, tax revenue. They lost the markets for whatever reason, right? They lost the markets, and then look at the level of infrastructure decay, institutional development. You can't compare it to other
Yeah.
cities. And so, the interplay is there. Now, which one comes first? It's a question that I don't bother to answer because um, I can control the markets, right? Like that's the part I think we can figure out. So hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think so. Maybe one last question on prosperity part before we move on to your more recent work. So, the books, the main example in the book, or the main examples, telecoms, automobiles, food distribution, low-cost healthcare, all those sort of things. So those things, they tend to create thick value chains. Jobs, distributors, suppliers, taxes, logistics, all this kind of stuff, and training as well, right? But then the next wave of innovation that is coming through now is increasingly digital, and obviously artificial intelligence driven. But there are low and middle income countries. They kind of have steep barriers around connectivity, right?
Yeah.
And this is not just
Yeah.
internet connectivity, and all this kind of thing. Compute, obviously, data and skills. Now, so my question now is, does AI now change your definition of a market creating innovation? And noting that AI and digital platforms can be asset light, labor light, and almost kind of like winner take most.
Yeah. Man, so the short answer is no, it doesn't, right? But then I would say I think it's a mirage that AI and digital platforms are asset light. Bro, I've never pushed a satellite into space. I've never dug undersea cables, right? Um, I mean, these things are asset heavy. We just don't see the assets. Yeah. I can see a substation. I mean, I saw one of your recent posts, right? You were either walking or driving past a substation in the UK, and you
Yeah.
wrote about power, right? And you wrote about power. But I don't see my internet where it's like magic, you just connect. Now I think what digital technology allows us do, once we understand there's a big cost to it. I mean, today there was a piece about how Nigeria in the first quarter has consumed 4 million terabytes of data in the first quarter. And that sounds like a lot, right? Terabyte sounds like a lot. 4 million is a lot. You put the two together, that's a lot. But then I started doing some research. I said, okay, what's that? Well, that turns out to be 0.027 terabytes of data per capita. And when you now go to like the US, China, it's like 30, so 200 to 300 times less. So I say we've not even arrived, so 4 million terabytes sounds like a lot, but I'm like, okay, it's still nothing. And so these things are they're expensive and they require a lot of assets. What they do, digital technologies, is it's really an efficiency play, right? In the sense that when you have commerce, you can make it electronic. So e-commerce. It's really hard to have e without the commerce. When you can use US Postal Service or whatever to deliver drugs, or you have an infrastructure of doctors and medical knowledge and so on. You can then use the digital layer to now increase access. But you see, you kind of have to have the fundamentals first. Now, AI kind of brings a different a different layer to this, and we can talk about AI. But I think my understanding of digital is that digital makes what you've done or you're already doing more efficient, and that's it. It doesn't necessarily create entirely new stuff. It just really makes what you're doing a lot more efficient. And as a result of that, you can expand access for sure, right? I don't want to downplay the impact of digital, but I also don't want this notion that digital will save us and we can leapfrog everything. I think that's not quite that is not that's not the way to think about it. Hard work must be done. When you introduce AI, um, then again, I have to slow down and ask, like, what exactly is AI, right? It's artificial intelligence, and that is sort of the input into most other technologies, most things we do is intelligence. It's sort of our own secret sauce. And so, you can now, somebody doesn't need to see, say, a pharmacist or a doctor. They can interrogate an AI platform that's vetted. It gives them good information. But that's one component of an entire value chain where you don't really care that you're talking to an AI. You're sick and you need to be well. And so if the AI or the doctor tells you, oh, you need to take these medications over the next 3 months, somebody has to make the medications. They have to deliver it to you, or you have to go out and get it. And so there's that information play, right? There's a lot of value there. But again, it doesn't. There are other things in the value chain that also have to happen for, I would say, consumption to happen, because the goal, and I've written about this a little. Um, the goal of any economy should be consumption. Now, I read about it in a tiny essay that one of your heroes, McCloskey, wrote, and and you know the it first seemed very flimsy, but then I'm like, when you really think about what we are doing, most of us in life, we are either in a state of struggle or consumption. And there's not a lot in between, right? Like every moment of my life, I'm either struggling or I'm consuming. So I get done with this podcast. I say, oh, I'm thirsty. You can characterize that as struggle. I consume a bottle of water. I need to go get my kids from school. Okay, that's the struggle. I get into my car. I consume the services. Like it's pretty easy. On this call right now, I'm consuming the services of my computer, the internet, and so on, to overcome the struggle of, oh, I needed to connect to be on this podcast. And so there's nothing in between really. And when you're able to build an economy where consumption is the goal, and you just make every instance of consumption easier over time, cheaper over time, you can have a holistic way to think about the economy. And so when I think about digital, um, I think a lot about, okay, what consumption is that enabling? And is it enabling it sustainably? Is it enabling it in a way that makes sense for the economy? Um, and so it's really, I I try not to get too excited by the technology, the what is, because let me land the plane here. Like what am I doing? Like what am I doing with internet? I've never eaten internet. What am I doing with it? The internet enables me communicate, enables me access something that's not in my physical presence, right? And so if we're able to think of these technologies in this way, not just let's just provide electricity for everybody. It's like, okay, for what? What is it powering? What is it enabling? Just build a road, rail. For what, right? Um, Look, these are complicated questions, issues. There's political economy, there's governance, elections, things. There are all those things that matter. But I think if we can slow down and ask these questions, we'll be able to invest in a way that we can get the returns faster than, everybody deserves to be connected. Um, yeah, yeah. Like, why? Is that what they really want? So, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. Um, in your recent notes, you write that jobs are not created by programs, but by consumption. I wish I could put that on a T-shirt. I think I would. Uh, you wrote that the better question is not uh how do we create jobs, but how do we create the conditions that make jobs inevitable? If a minister or a World Bank official took that seriously, what would they actually do differently? In other words, what does a job strategy look like when it is designed around demand creation rather than employment creation?
Yeah, so I mean, it requires a lot. It requires a lot. Which is partly why um I don't I don't know that it will be done. Now, okay. So I'll give you an example of what I think it requires, and then maybe I try to be pragmatic in my work. We did some work for a philanthropy who cares about job creation, and one of the things we try to understand is, okay, how many jobs are in this sector now? how big is the sector? How big are the markets? And this is really simple math, right? This isn't complicated. And you just do division. It is multiplication and division. Okay, this market has, is $2 billion. There are 2 million people who work there. With that information, you already start to have some really cool data points, right? Because you can now get, okay, revenue per worker and employee gives you an idea of how productive that sector is, at least from a labor productivity standpoint. And then you can now start comparing it with other markets where the other economies where the markets are a lot larger and where consumption of a particular product or service is deep, right? So 90%, or in the U.S., right, 99% of homes and offices have refrigerators. So if you use that, you say, okay, this is how big the market is here. This is how many people work in this sector. You can start playing with some numbers. And then that gives you an idea of where a country like Nigeria or Ethiopia, somewhere else is. Um, gives you a sense of the productivity in that economy. And then you can start to say, okay, if this economy became a little more productive, right? Instead of $2,000 per person, what if we went to 5,000 per person? What are some of the things we will need to do there? How might that scale? What are some of the first investments we'll need to make? You just sort of try to understand like where you are, where a theoretical maximum is, and then understand diffusion curves a little bit. So how the innovation will spread, how scale will happen. I mean, you slow down and try to understand some of these things. I think that can inform a job strategy. You can now, instead of like we're gonna provide access to 100 million people in the next 5 years, which is not realistic, but still, we're gonna train this many people in this skill in the next 3 years. It's like, well, maybe not, right? Maybe the economy doesn't need to train that many people that soon. That like though you just start to become more surgical in your interventions because we don't have the money. Um, we owe a lot of people money. It's not like we're using all the money we have to better the lives of the average person. And so, those are the ways I would slow down and start thinking about these things. Um, it's, but, I'll be honest, Toby, I'll be honest. Do I expect that to happen? I mean, I don't. And I'm not going to say people are, look, it's not, I don't know the intentions of man, right? I don't like, no, I can't see into men's hearts. I only see what they do. And based on what they do, that's how I have to operate. Baldwin, James Baldwin, he was interviewed once and he wrote about it. He said, look, man, like I don't know what's in your heart. I don't know what you do, but I know how the trade unionists treat like black people in America. I don't know what's in the heart of the people in the Department of Education, but I know how they treat this. And so, in the sense that I don't really know what's in the heart, but if I just look at what they do, what people do, um, then I cannot realistically expect meaningful change to happen. Um, Not because they don't want it to. I mean, maybe they do, but if you've not fundamentally changed the way you've been organized, if you've not fundamentally changed the people in your institution, whether it's the World Bank or so on, um, then how can I now expect you to fundamentally change your approach? That's hard. If I'm a swimmer in the Olympics, you cannot expect me to go and sign up for 100 meters race and then again, it's not possible. You know.
Okay. I think so. Staying with that same piece, you define a job as as a set of tasks that creates value for someone willing to pay, right? And you rightly emphasize that jobs provide not only income, but they also provide purpose, stability, hope, and dignity. I mean, these are, very, very important things. They tend to be intangible, right? Now, how do we distinguish between jobs that merely absorb labor, like what a number of African countries do, like with agriculture, for example, they treat it as almost kind of like a labor sink where, we're just going to dump all the people in there who have no skill to do anything else. So how do we distinguish between those kind of jobs that just merely absorb labor and jobs that actually build prosperity? I think one of the things I love reading about the story of Henry Ford was his workers. Like, I mean, they were, I mean, you wouldn't do that today, right? But he would send people to their homes to find out how they were treating their kids, how they were treating their wives, that sort of thing. The environment they were working in and all, because it just felt like that was a whole part of everything. So how do we distinguish with those types of jobs where they actually build prosperity, and what separates a job generating market from a genuinely prosperity generating market?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So one, this might be okay. Let me try. Um, because that's a tough one. That's a very tough one. Um, we are privileged. Let me just start there, right? Again, doing some research for the work I'm currently on in this book. Pew Research Center helped me understand that roughly 7% of the global population, right, lives on more than $50 a day, $18,000 a year, right? 18 grand a year. Okay. In Africa, 0.3%, right, is what they say. 0.3%. You do the math on that, it's 4.5 million people. So the rising middle class that is coming and coming, it's still coming. I don't know, 18 grand a year is not a lot of money, but 0.3% of people in Africa live on more than that, right? It's about 4% living on more than $300 a month, which is $3,600 a year on the continent of Africa. So the first thing when I heard those stats, I struggled with them for a long time because I happen to be a part of the 0.3%, right? I mean, think about those odds, right? And people joke, say, if you could come back as another person, I say, look, I'm not coming back. I don't want to come back. Because if you understand the odds, you too, you won't want to come back. So relax.
Exactly.
I'm good. So first, there's just a huge amount of privilege that we have. And I don't know that we even understand it like at first. We have to understand and appreciate who we are as we walk around this world. Because a lot of us may have actually very, very small views of ourselves, very small views of our impact, what we can do, no, you are the elite of the elite of the elite. That's the first thing. The reason I say that is it tends to be those in the 0.3% that over time, like, build out the economies, not because they're more intelligent. It's because, like, building an economy requires capital, it requires networks, it requires social capital, connections, and so on. And they tend to be the ones who have it. So just understanding who we are is key. But then this is connected to your other question is when we now appreciate who we are and see that the vast majority of people, not even just in Africa, but in the world, are struggling. I mean, Toby gave us the stats on the World Bank, $6 a day, and 3.5 billion people, right? That's a ton of people. Um, I think for me, I want to accelerate their own path from where they are to, like, the life that I'm living. Not necessarily in a materialistic way, but in a way that I can guarantee you this now, and I'm going to say it live, at least recorded. There is no version of my life that I can imagine where, like, I lose. Like, just really think about that, right? There's just no version. I lose my job. I lose my house. I am so connected, so networked. I know enough people that it's not ideal, but I just can't go hungry. Like I can't even the idea that I don't know where my next meal, it can never happen to me. And I think that's like that's a realization of who many of us are. And so to figure out a way to accelerate the folks who for them that's their daily reality into where we are, that is key. That is important. But now this is where I don't know if it's a political thing to say, but at the same time, gravity operates a certain way, economies grow in a certain way, and there tends to be a path where a lot of jobs in poor economies, they are just grunt work. Even Henry Ford, right? Why he moved his people from 10 hours, 12 hours a day, to 6 days a week to 40-hour work week. We're just celebrating the 100-year anniversary. Well, so he run his plants 24/7, 8 hours shifts. He talked about how the person who was working all day, well, they didn't really have time to consume. They didn't really have time to drive out, enjoy life, and consume more. Because you think about it, when you're working, you're not really what are you when you're working, you're not at a nice dinner, you're not doing other things, right? And so it started out with the grunt work. It was really hard, but then it evolved. And we've settled on 40-hour work week now. So where I'm going with this is with agriculture, it's just a labor suck. Um, it tends to be the kind of labor suck that is like, well, again, for our numbers, we can just absorb a lot of people, right? Not really slowing down to think, how do we make it so that there's no ceiling for this person? This person's a farmer, or this person does some small processing. How do we make it so that what they are doing, the average Nigerian can get access to? That will ultimately change the way you even think about and understand agriculture from just processing cassava, which I know you love, uh, processing cassava to actually thinking about a lot of the innovations that come from food, a lot of innovations that come from ancillary products and services you'd have to do with food. And it just changes again. Now, the US, we say, agriculture is 1% of GDP. Well, yeah, but it's also, I think, about 12 or so percent of the manufacturing jobs in the US. If you look at the amount of money people spend on the percentage of income they spend on food, it's about 11 or so percent. People are eating out. When you start a new restaurant, what is that? That's agriculture. When you start a new snacking company, that's agriculture. Like we think it just we have to think about people beyond that's a smallholder farmer. So if they're making $100 a month, that's good enough. Like why? No, that's not good enough. Well, what's good enough is for people to experience life the way we experience it without the fears of where's this going to come from? Where's that going to come from? If my child falls sick, I don't have those fears. And I think for me, that's what prosperity looks like. That's what it feels like from a material standpoint. Um, Philosophically and then sort of the metaphysical, that's a different conversation. But I do think from a material standpoint, we just need to figure out a way that um, people are living the kind of lives that I would say we generally are. That's how I would put it. It's hard to say what's the amount of money, um, but because again, yeah, that's difficult, right? But there's sort of this goal um, that, and I think it's possible. Right. I think for me, it's possible. It's one of the biggest things I learned just working with clay. It's very difficult, but it's possible. So,
I mean, you sort of touched on my question in that answer, which is what you're arguing in the piece that jobs for job's sake programs often fail because they are not anchored in real demand. And once the subsidy ends, the jobs disappear. I use Nigeria's N-Power initiative as an example of temporary employment and skills training that struggled with labor market alignment and post-program integration. In fragile economies or places with weak purchasing power, people have enormous unmet needs, but very little effective demand. So, how does the entrepreneur convert struggle? You've talked about this into consumption when the customer needs is real, but their ability to pay is limited.
Yeah, this is a really hard one because number one, entrepreneurship is one of those things that passion plays a big role, right? I'm passionate about X or Y, so I'm doing it. But on the other hand, um, I think for an entrepreneur, on some level, it doesn't matter what you're passionate about. The most important thing you should be passionate about is the market, is what is on ground. For most of our economies, right? It's really hard for me to see how we how we grow without like massive investment in like agriculture and what agriculture calls for. Um, Not because there's anything special about that sector. And I'm talking about Nigeria specifically. If I were in Botswana or if I were in even Rwanda, right? I think agriculture should still play a role, but you can get super duper creative there. You can actually think about plugging yourself. So if we think about economy as in growing the actual economy, um, you have a small population, and if you become maybe a small you integrate yourself into the digital economy, the global digital economy, and your engineers are making 40, 50, $60,000 a year. You can see how that would have massive ripple effects in the entire economy if your population is relatively small. But when you have a big population, it's just really hard for me, and a lot of people are hungry and there's a lot of poverty. It's really hard for me to see how trying to make food super cheap is not like shouldn't be your number one, two, and three priority. It doesn't mean you're not investing in other things in the economy, right? We have a lot of, Nollywood and um, Afrobeats. Um, there's a big sort of software engineering wave in Nigeria, um, and so those things are good, um, but it's really hard for me when you to answer your question, struggle to consumption. It's just really hard for me to see how you enable consumption in areas that really are not more fundamental. Food as one of the biggest examples for me, and from there you can now start to do other things. But yeah, for Nigeria, I think it's just hard. Um, the other way I think. And I want to be nuanced here because the other way is export, right? People say export led growth. I think export is cool, but um, what market are you exporting to? Um, um, and what I mean by that is you can export into large global markets that are mature. And if you do that, right, there's a ceiling on how much money you can make. And even though that can bring in Forex and that can be good for your people, right, there's sort of a ceiling there. And that tends to be more of a race to the bottom type of situation. There's only so much money I'm going to pay for a pair of jeans, right? Like, um, and it's good, right? Bangladesh is doing well at it now. Ethiopia is still kind of, we'll see, right? How that goes. But it's a pair of jeans is a pair of jeans is a pair of jeans, right? But if you're able to integrate into an export market that's growing, that's serving non-consumers, It's similar to what the Asian tigers and folks did. Um, I think that's a different kind of export than just export, right? So I think those are the ways I would think about it. If you're going to serve the local market, you really have to understand what's the primary struggle and how do I create consumption. And a lot of it is just food. It's just the most basic things. Like our pure water market is, I think, upwards of $1 billion or so, right? Like there is that's where I would go. But then if I were gonna go exports, I would think about it, not just let me just send something through the Apapa port or Lagos Free Trade Zone, but I would think about it maybe a little bit deeper. So
Okay. Right. Okay. So I want us to close out this by I want to invite you to on a bit of a more personal note, if you like. Right. So I want to ask you about Clayton Christensen. For many people who never met him, Clay, as you called him, was not just a management thinker. He gave them a new language of understanding, innovation, disruption, purpose, and even how to live a meaningful life. I've been reading Stephen Witt's book on NVIDIA, um, the thinking game, sorry, the thinking machine. I keep mixing it up with the documentary, and I was quite surprised to read about how much, that book influenced Jensen Huang, right? It's his most beloved business book. And, obviously at the time it was written, Christensen's idea of innovation and disruption was counterintuitive, right? So basically, there are times when it is right not to listen to customers, right? At the time, that was just, I mean, a crazy thing to say at the time, but it made people came around and eventually made sense, Now, obviously, that's how people from outside know him, but you had the much a rarer experience of working with him closely over many years, and ultimately you wrote a book, The Prosperity Paradox, with him. Um, so two questions, right? What do you think the public most deeply understood about Clay? Something people admired from a distance that was actually genuinely true up close, and then from your own experience. So the second bit of the question is from your own experience, what is something about him that people could only really know from being in a room with him, right? So the way he thought, the way he listened, the way he walked, or just the way he related to people. So yeah, those two things.
yeah, no, Clay, that was a good one. That's a good one. I'm gonna try to think about the second answer because it's really I've never gotten that before. Um, he was the real deal, right? So the only book he ever wrote by himself was his first book. And some could argue maybe it was his most successful book, so all of us kind of brought him down. but um, but he had co-authors for every other book, and it's not because he automatically just he didn't know how to write anymore. He was prolific, brilliant, but he made it his goal to help people. And there are a few things there's sort of the world of academia, but then there's sort of the business school world is kind of a different beast in itself. And I would call it exposure. Once you have exposure, there are rooms I've been in because of my association with Clay, right? Once you have that exposure, and there are ways people think about me because of my exposure to Clay and so on. But that was his goal. It was like, okay, I have this platform now, man, how many people can I bring on before I go? That's how he lived his life, big and small. Like how if you were in a room with him, you felt you were the only one there. You felt he truly cared about you. Um, and I think I just want to say that because it's I think a lot of people got this from his work when they read his book. I got so many messages after he passed away from people who didn't even know me, but they reached out to me because he had died. It was really surreal. Um, But I think the thing I would touch on is like people experienced in his book and then in real life is just he was just incredibly brilliant. And I've learned something from working with Clay about brilliance, and it is it's something I strive for, and it is always something I'm going to try to aspire to. So the way Clay wrote was so simple that he would make complex things seem simple. So you never quite walked away from reading his work feeling like, man, Clay Christensen is so smart. Instead, you walked away having a new and a deeper understanding of the world and how it worked, and you felt smarter and more empowered. It's a weird thing, right? Because there are some guys that I listen to and I read and I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy, his brain or her brain, it doesn't work like ours, right? They're so smart and amazing, and you're just in awe of them, right? And I think that's awesome. And Clay was that, but then he was so meticulous, methodical, patient in a way. He really tried to understand something. So when he communicated it in a way that all of us in the room could understand it, and then we could communicate this crazy concept in a way that's so simple. And I just think that is such a beautiful thing because the light was not on him per se. He was really trying to shine the light on others and arm people with good frameworks and theories and ways to understand the world. Um, and then I would say that the thing that would maybe so I don't know if it would surprise people, but you would have only experienced if you were super close was um, I'll just give an example. I can't tell you the number of times he'd walk into the office. When he was alive, and he would just genuinely thank me for working with him. And it would confuse me because I'm like, no, I'm so like, you don't understand, man. The gratitude goes like this way. It's a one-way street. Um, and he would just be like, man, thank you so much for working with me. This is really important work, and I'm so grateful. And he meant it. And sometimes we would get emotional, right? And he, more than one occasion, right? And this is where, in the world of today, it's kind of sad that where we've sort of um, bifurcated this like personal life and professional life. But I can't tell you how many times like I just felt a deep sense of love that he loved me as a person, as a friend, and to be able to love the people you work with, not like in a weird way, but to just really want the best for them, to root for them, to like that. I want to do that, right, for the people I work with. It's so key. And if you think about this, right, it really impacts the way you are as a person. I remember once, and it's the last thing I'll share, a big lesson. We hadn't published the prosperity paradox, and somebody was giving us some feedback, and it was kind of tough feedback because the person was talking about how like, no, Hans Rosling's mindfulness, his book on how the world has made so much progress and so on. Um, and he was like, no, we've made so much progress and this and that. And I was trying to explain to the guy, like, yeah, but like, yeah, we've made so much progress from 50, 60 years ago. But fact of the matter is, if I wake up today and like I lost two kids, like I don't care that I would have lost five kids if I was born in 1970. I was trying to
Yeah.
explain. And Clay he just put his hands on the table, hit the table and said, um, I think his name was Rob, thank you so much for reading our book. We're going to and he talked so slow. Yeah, we're gonna see what we can do about the feedback. And right there, what happened was he taught me something that like he's like, look, he didn't say this, but this is what I got. This guy took time out of his life, dedicated it to you and me. he read something you wrote. And you think about time, it's the one resource we can never get back. So I give you an hour, I'm never getting it back. I give you $1 million, I can figure out a way to make it back. Time is like, you're never getting it back. And and it just that experience taught me that whenever anybody gives you time, even though sometimes it's tough or is this just gratitude and just like he's a great Clay Christensen. Here's this guy giving him feedback on his book. Like, who's this guy? I really don't even remember his name right now. And his response was deep gratitude. I can go on and on, man, but he was special, bro. I'm like, it's been probably the biggest joy of my life, privilege to have worked with him, truly.
I mean, is there a particular moment with him or a lesson from him that has stayed with you as you have continued the work without him? Maybe something like you draw on just to continue this work as you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so this is one of the things that what he tried to do was he built his whole career around um sort of developing theories or a framework, a way to see the world, right? And then when you see the world a certain way, it's really hard for you to unsee it, right? Um, and I think for me, that idea that you wrestle with a problem, wrestle through a problem, and then you come at a place where, okay, now I think I understand how this works. Um, that is probably one of the biggest gifts. Because yeah, you know, I mean, when you understand some like fundamentals, you kind of are comfortable, right? Like I understand gravity, so like I know I'm not gonna jump off the roof of this building. Like, you don't have to test it every time. And I think this is very connected to how I think about innovation, entrepreneurship, even economics, politics, the political economy. It's There are few things that I like. If those things are true, then um, it stands to reason that, okay, all these other things are probably going to happen. And it kind of gives you stability. You're just clear, like you're very clear in terms of your thinking. Toby, your piece recently on the elections and how this one it could be different, and we need to really think about what it means. Losing well, and so on and so forth. I think something like that is like, okay, we do elections every however many years, but you now slow down and say, okay, what's different about this time? And how might that inform how I vote, campaign, or so on and so forth? But so there's a lot of noise, right? There's going to be a lot of noise in the world. There's always noise. But when you can slow down and just pick something, try to understand what's really going on, then you're not moved by a lot of the noise. And so I think that for me was a big, big one. And it still carries on today. It's what I'm trying to do with the book I'm working on, which really is just on understanding the phenomenon of market creation. How do you go from nobody has access to this thing then on Monday, and then on Tuesday you wake up, all of a sudden everybody has access. And not just that, right? This is like there's a chapter I call the magic of market creation. The magic is that when that happens, when consumption now becomes widespread, we forget. Like we forget that nobody had access. We can't imagine life without access. It's like, nah, and it's just like, but guys, you were there when the guy was starting. People said he was crazy. You know, um, and I think what I'm trying to do is really slow down, try to understand what the phenomenon is. Is there a process that plays out? How do you finance it? What kind of leadership values do you need to make it happen? Because again, that's not something that everybody is called to do or I think should do. But Clay kind of helped me with like, okay, slow down, understand the fundamental, and then see what you can write. Yeah.
Mm, mm. I mean,
Does the book have a title
you
yet?
yeah.
No,
Give us the
not
tea.
yet.
Give us
Okay,
the
Not
okay.
tea.
yet. Not yet. Not yet. It's funny. I was gonna call it the prosperity process and make it a part two, but then I realized, with what's going on in the world, right? Especially with artificial intelligence and inequality, and just the amount of capital available in the world, over the past 2, 3 decades, to me, it's insane how we have so much more capital chasing fewer deals. Um, they're just dry powder is ballooning. And then continuation funds, people are investing. It's sort of like maybe it's not a big Ponzi scheme yet, but it just feels like,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, and I'm like, well, you meet a carpenter, and every problem is like a nail and a hammer. You meet me, and like every problem is market creation. So I'm like, well, I think if you create new markets, this capital will find stuff to do, and you could solve all these problems, create prosperity, and so that's gonna kind of where I'm going. So I think it would be a more global book than, I would say, the prosperity paradox. Um, and then I kind of want some of it to be mechanistic as well, right? Like, have a playbook in there. But it's really, if I'm able to demystify, like finance, for instance, that's a very big one. But like working with Clay, now it makes sense to me why, man, we have a lot of capital, but then you're not seeing the capital do a lot of things. And like I get that. I understand why that might be happening, right? Because every dollar of capital it's not just the capital, it has priorities. Um, there are things it can do and things it can't do, places it can go, places it can't go. And so even as we see it balloon, it's like, well, there's not yet an infrastructure or a pathway for that capital to go to some places to create new markets. It doesn't have that mandate. And so how do we then do that? Right. Anyways, so just it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but I'm learning a lot as I do it. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, we are too. And please give us the first interview when it's out.
No
Yeah.
problem. No problem. Well, first I sent Faye a draft of the prosperity paradox. So I'll send you guys a draft, and then after you read it, you let me know if you still want the interview.
Sure thing. Yeah, that's right.
You also have the honor of being the first paid subscriber on 1914. So
Yes, yes,
we
yeah.
want to thank you for
Really?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
yeah. So you were
Okay.
very
Okay.
first paid, yeah. So
Wow. Well, my hope and prayer is that there are many more.
yeah.
Yeah. No, because look, it's look, I listened to your interview with Chude, and I do mean it. I do mean it when I say, I mean, I don't, yeah, I would be lying if I said I've read 100% or listened to 100% of everything, but I really do try to stay up to speed on what you guys are doing. And I remember him describing you guys as like national treasures or something like that. And I think you are doing a public good. And I want to continue to support your work and see how we can get more people to listen and read and just learn, right? I think for me, I would characterize you guys as don't laugh, but as intellectual entertainers. And there's no difference between what you do and maybe what like Beyonce does. Just that, she makes a whole lot more money.
And yeah.
But if you but
we
if
wouldn't
you
mind some Beyonce money.
Yeah.
no. Me too, right? But if you think about it, right, intellectually stimulating and it's entertaining. Um, but it's not just entertaining for laughs or, you go and dance and but it's intellectual entertainment. You take this concept, this issue, and you write about it or talk about it in a way that helps me learn and is also entertaining. And so those two together, um, that's I don't know, it's a blessing. So I'm grateful for the work you guys do. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to see you again soon.
absolutely. Thank you. Thanks so much.